Ano ai me ke aloha ina makamaka, and welcome to A Second Glance, where we take an in-depth look at issues in and around Hawaii and the rest of the world. In this set of programs, I would like to discuss with you health, the issues of health, and the different ways of looking at health itself. This will be at least a three-part series on the question of health. And in this first part, what we will talk about is health and wellness system. The health and wellness system as compared to the medical pharmacological system. And oftentimes we get these two systems confused. And we'll go deeper into better understanding of what these systems are supposed to be, what it's not, what it is. So that's the first program. And we'll also talk about the importance of deep culture, an idea or a concept that not very many people are well aware of. And I want to get into some clarity with regards to what deep culture is all about and how it impacts our health and our health systems. So that will be the first program that we will be talking about. The second program will talk about what I call the Kumu Ola Pono. And in that program, we'll talk about when we look at an individual, we can not only look at that person as a biological, sort of mechanical, physiological entity and how to improve the health of that individual. But what we also need to look at are some larger issues of a sense of spirituality and that spiritual nature about that individual. We also need to take a look at his or her environment, the conditions under which he lives, the homelessness or the fact that he has appropriate shelter or she, the type of education that is necessary, employment and other conditions. So we'll take a broad look, what we call a kumu ola pono, to see that the person lives within a sense of pono. And from there, we'll take a look at this other idea of behavior and how we try to modify behavior. Because after all, it is behavior that is the basis of most of, not all of, but most of the chronic illnesses that a person suffers from, whether it's because of behavioral health or primary health care, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, even cancer at times, highly affected by one's behavior, or schizophrenia, depression, and other things like that. It is behavior that drives these things. So how do we modify behavior? And so we'll try to take a look at the behavioral aspect and the need of appropriate behavior modification systems. You don't modify behavior by merely punishment, and if he doesn't follow, punish him again and punish him worse and that kinds of stuff. That is a very simplistic and ineffective approach towards behavior. So there's a lot of things that we will be talking about, and so in order for me to prepare for the first program, we'll take a very short break and I'll be right back to talk about health and wellness as compared to the medical pharmacological system of healthcare. I want to thank you very much for allowing me to be part of your private spaces and to be able to introduce myself and bring these matters to you. Aloha and welcome back to A Second Glance, in which we take an in-depth look at issues in and around Hawaii. I am Pokalai Nui and I will be your host for this program. Briefly about myself, I am the Executive Director of an organization known as Hale Na'au Pono. We're also known as a Waianae Coast Community Mental Health Center, and I have been in this position for the last approximately 15 years. What I'd like to talk about is the issue of, or is a matter of the health and wellness system. And every time we talk about health and wellness, we imagine doctors, we imagine medication, and then we imagine going back to the doctor and adjusting medication And then we have all the different types of medication, and we go to different specialists. And we get so involved in this as if it really indeed is the health and wellness system. And then I started thinking to myself, actually scratching my head and thinking to myself and said, is this really a health and wellness system, or is this merely a medical pharmacological system that we have drawn a certain dependence toward, and as a result of that dependence we have sort of convinced ourselves that, yeah, that is the health and wellness system. But what else can we possibly be looking for if this is not the full or the appropriate health and wellness system that we really should be having? And what is this system? Well, this is a medical system. This is a pharmacological system. And what has happened over the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years is that we have found a merger between the medical profession and the pharmacological profession, such that too often, and I'm not saying that it happens all the time, but too often, we have this codependency between the two, or some people would say it's not even codependency, it's a conspiracy between these two industries or elements within our society, so that the pharmaceutical companies will come down and campaign and sell and propagandize their goods to the medical doctors. And it's not only the medical doctors, it's all the people in that whole row of purchasing of these pharmacological products. So that we become the purchasers, we become the clients, we become, some would say, even the victims, because of our continued dependence, believing that there is no such thing as recovery from chronic illnesses. So if you're overweight, or if you're obesely overweight, is that a contradiction in terms? If you're morbidly overweight, or what they call morbidly obese, or whatever the condition is, diabetes, somehow we are led to believe that that is our lot in life, that we need to continue to maintain and control it through medication. And so we become dependent on medication, and we become dependent on what the physician tells us, because we have conceded or ceded to that physician our free will and our control of our life itself. And it's not for only those particular, what do you call it, those particular maladies, but for many, many other things. We simply concede the control of our health and our wellness. Why? Because we call that system the health and wellness system, but not really seeing that all it is a medical pharmacological system, a medicine or a drug system in which you attach doctors who give you the drugs, as opposed to other drugs that you may have taken without a prescription, either street drugs or over-the-counter medication. But still the substitute of substance to maintain what supposedly is your health. So I'm suggesting that what we need to do first is to have a good look at what is this health and wellness system. You see, if they capture from us the idea that this is indeed the health and wellness system, because the folks are going to just accept that kind of explanation, then what happens when they can get away with stealing our real health and wellness system, which is our environment, which is our relationship with our sense of spirituality, which is our character development, which is many, many other things, relationship with family, relationship with loved ones, a relationship with even our bosses and our employees and the rest. Relationships are so important. Is that not part of the health and wellness system? If we concede the system merely to the medical practitioners and drug companies, then what do we do when a GMO manufacturing company comes into our community? And we believe that, oh, we're having our health and wellness already taken care of, so let's not pay attention to the fact that they are spraying in our community, or they are bringing in different kinds of foods that are not appropriately tested, or other things. When we become distracted from the underlying issue by the misnaming of the issue itself, then we get bought into, we become convinced, we become brainwashed into the belief that what they are calling it is indeed that system. And we concede in the Hawaiian term, we call it our mana, our power, our mental framework into that system. It's very similar to what had happened back in about the 1940s, I believe it occurred, when they renamed the War Department to the Department of Defense, without our fully appreciating or realizing that by that switch, then it must mean that our country or any other country that has a defense department cannot create wars. They're only defensive. And yet that same department are the ones that carry out the aggressiveness in other countries. But because it has been changed, or the name has been changed, then it can no longer be possible. So we need to be very, very careful about this, what do you call it, switch and bait or something like that, where they throw you a particular name. We need to take back our own understandings. We need to take back control of our own life, I guess you would call it, and understand what the underlying system really is. Okay. I think I've delved enough into that, so you think I've exhausted the subject. Okay, so let's move beyond that. But in conclusion, let me say, in concluding this part, let me say that I have been regarded as a diabetic for over 40 years. I have been taking a particular medication, changed to a different medication, back to this medication, and I suffered from a particular type of pain that wouldn't go away, pains in my legs and the rest. A friend of mine, not a licensed doctor, but very interested in health, he said, hey, what kind of medicine you taking? And so I said, well, for my diabetes, I got to take this, this, and that. He said, give me that medicine. So I showed it to him, and he said, here, throw it away, throw it away. I said, what do you mean, brother? How can I just throw away the medicine? You know, mentally, I've been stuck on it. He said, throw the medicine away because that is what is keeping you diabetic. I said, no, 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 you don't understand. He said, no, you don't understand. It's keeping you as a diabetic because now you have become dependent on it and you believe that you need it. And you probably need it because you're not looking at any other changes in order to improve your condition so that you are not diabetic anymore. So, as a leap of faith, or as a toss of faith, I guess, out went the medicine. But I continued to take measurements. He says, this is what I want you to do. Change your diet. Change your way of life. Exercise some more. More than you exercise. Exercise more. So I said, okay, brother. And so I started eating more fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits, vegetables. He said 30 days, that's all it takes, 30 days. Change your body anticipation for this kind of food that will redirect you, and then we'll take a look at where you are. I took some blood tests after that, then went to see my medical doctor, my expert who tells me what kind of medicine to take for my condition. Before doing that, I told him, brother, I'm going to stop taking the medicine. He looked at me, he shook his head, he says, cannot be done, cannot be done. I said, well, I'm going to try, because if I believe you that it cannot be done, won't get done. So about 60 days later, after going through all of this, I went back to the doctor. He read my, my blood reports, my blood panel and all that stuff. And he looked up at me, he looked down at the results, and he looked up at me and he says, you're not diabetic. I says, why not? He says, your A1C is so low that you're not diabetic. You know, you're within average range. In fact, a little bit below average. And I said, see, Doc, I told you. But, you know, he didn't appreciate my telling him, Doc, I told you, it can be done. So he just shakes his head and he says, all your other numbers are very good. Your this, and that. I don't mean to get too much into my own personal medical condition, but I've been able to improve my health by turning back to some natural ways of keeping healthy and paying attention to it and not using the excuse that it's inconvenient or I like the taste of this kind of food or I enjoy eating a lot of meats and all that stuff. If you're serious about life, then be serious about taking control of your life. Otherwise, if you want to concede it to the pharmaceuticals, then go ahead. Keep taking the drugs. Keep listening to someone who you know common sense would not agree with. Yeah, and common sense comes from our development of what has been told to us based on our culture, based on our ancestors. The natural common sense approach. You want to be healthy? Exercise. You want to be healthy? Watch your diet. Or other kinds of stuff. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to solve everyone's problems. I'm saying that common sense should be an important ingredient in the kind of way we treat our bodies. There's another subject that sort of applies to what I'm talking about, and it in fact pervades the whole discussion and the whole way of life that we approach things. And this is what I call my Dai and Ola paradigm. Okay? And you will see it on the screen, this idea of Dai. Domination, individualism, and exclusion. And let me first talk about Dai, and then later on I'll talk about Ola and what I mean by Ola. So, as we look at our systems of, or the institutions that guide our society, we have an economic system, we have an educational system, we have a social system, we have a medical system, we have a political system, we have a national security system, we have a judicial system. All of these formal systems are based on three basic principles, and you had seen those principles: domination, individualism, and exclusion. And there you see it. And they form that acronym or the mnemonic DIE or DIE. And my friends, that's exactly where that system is taking us. Look at the way we handle our environment. We're killing the environment. As long as you have a deed that gives you the right to own this property, you see a tree on that property, although it has been on that property for 1,000 years. You believe that you have a right to dominate over it. And so as you build your house, you're going to build it right over that tree, and so you're going to remove that tree. Not giving a moment's thought to perhaps the tree has some rights there too. And maybe you can build around it, or at least give it some consideration, or do some adjustments, or adjusting so that other things may exist. So that rather than being so dominating, it's taking the approach that a lot of the native Hawaiians would take, and many others, not only native Hawaiians. The Hawaiians call it the Olu Olu approach. Okay? So, O for Olu Olu. And I noticed that on the screen it's Ola rather than Olu Olu, but it should be Olu Olu. Later on we'll talk about, and you can go to the dictionary and take a look at this concept of Olu Olu. It means to be comfortable with, to avoid the domineering, this confrontational approach, to be in gentle relationship with. Although you disagree with another person or you object to a certain way of doing it, it's not a matter of having to crash into the other one and to be confrontational, but to be more gentle as you approach these ideas. Individualism is another area. We're always praising individualism, and individualism is good in certain cases. But really, in our community, is it always so individualistic? Isn't it the case that we are all supported by everyone else within the community? You cannot have an individualistic store in your community because the store needs customers. You need to support one another. And if you run out of supplies, you need someone to bring the supplies to you. You need your farmers, you need precious land to grow the food products. Individualism is very limited. The world operates through lokahi. The world operates through supporting one another in teams, in groups. And you will find that when you look at our children and how they are better educated, they are always reaching a higher level of performance when they are able to operate in groups. I remember being at Waianae High School, where I went to, and I would come into class. One day I'm sitting next to Ho'ipo, and usually we would sit in the back of the class because we Hawaiians didn't want to be called upon because our language skills were not as equivalent to many of the others who spoke English far better. We were deeply ingrained in Pidgin English. So we didn't want to be called on. Usually we sat in the back of the class. So one day I was sitting in the back of the class, Ho'ipo is sitting next to me. The teacher walks in and the teacher says, "Okay, children, pop quiz today." And I'm mumbling to myself, "Oh, pop quiz, I hate pop quizzes." So she writes 5 questions on the board and she says, "Separate, I want you to be quiet, I don't want any cheating." And the test begins now. So I'm trying to find answers to question number 1, question number 2. Question number 3, I'm puzzled. I don't know where to go. So I said, "Ho'ipo, what is the answer for question number 3? She said, "Poka, the answer is this, this, and that." The teacher comes in, sees Ho'ipo telling me what the answer is. And she says, "Ho'ipo, what you doing over there?" She says, "How come you're talking to Poka?" And so she says, "Oh, Poka, he don't know the answer to number 3. So I got to tell him the answer. The teacher says, "You folks are cheating." Ho'ipo is sitting there, "No, we're not cheating. He don't know the answer, so I got to tell him what the answer is." No, you folks are cheating." Okay. So you see this die system, even in our education system, with testing and elevation and who's the superior, who's the inferior, and the separation of children so that you cannot assist one another. You ring the bell, we're in the class, we operate under a DIE system. You ring the bell again, we're out of the class, you're operating under an OLA system, a system that elevates lokahi, a system that is olu, a system that is based on aloha. So you keep ringing the bell back and forth, so we're out in recess, we operate under an OLA system of aloha, of lokahi, of olu. You ring the bell again, we're back in the classroom, and we operate in a domination, individualism, and exclusion system. And people wonder why our kids are coming out of our system schizophrenic, with a sort of a double mindset, not sure what is the underlying rules and not even able to question what the underlying rules are, but somehow feeling it. When we go home and we go to our kupuna and we talk with our kupuna, it's always very respectful, very pleasant. And when we deal with our family and our cousins and our playmates, it's always under a system of sharing and caring and aloha. And yet when you get back into the classroom, it's dog eat dog. So what we end up doing is we become good players in the DIE system. But we are mindful, or we are reminded oftentimes that, hey, watch out. You may win the rat race, but be sure you don't end up being the rat. Okay. So the question is, how do you maintain your humanity, that ola deep culture, as you walk through the systems of the DIE? Whether it's a social system, a medical system, an economic system, an educational system, an environmental system, how do you approach that in ola rather than in dai? As we deal with the question of health, healthcare, that too, how we approach one another, how we approach our environment, how we approach our relationship to our sense of God or gods and goddesses. It all are affected by how we incorporate this sense of what our deep culture is and how we try to create changes within that system that operate under a DIE mentality. How is it possible that we can switch around the economic system so that we become more graceful, more non-competitive, more caring, more sharing, and in this way create a more healthy community, an overall healthy community by shifting to Ola from a DIE system? How can we change economics to become more Ola instead of DIE? And we might say, well, now you're talking about economics. Before you were talking about education. You might even talk about employment, and you may also talk about whatever it is. All of this has to be seen as a holistic system. There's no real separation between one or the other system. Our health has to be dependent on a holistic form. Whether or not we are employed or unemployed, that will affect our health. Whether or not we have shelter or no shelter, that will affect our health. Whether or not we have a loving family or a family that is bitter and always fighting with one another and that is divided, that will affect our overall health. It will affect our health not only in terms of our mental condition, but it will affect our health in terms of our physical condition as well. I have been given the signal that my time is up. In other words, hamau. And I want to thank you for this opportunity of sharing these ideas with you. Mahalo anui loa, and we'll be back for other discussions on Hawaiian health. Aloha Hawaii, a hui ho.
Kaulana nā pua o Hawaii, Kupa'a mahope o ka aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, Pala pala anunu me ka pāka.